Surah 18, verses 83 through 86. They ask thee concerning Dual-Qarnayn. Most commentators believe that refers to Alexander the Great. They ask thee concerning Dual-Qarnayn. Say, I will rehearse to you something of his story. Verily, we established his power on earth, and we gave him the ways and the means to all ends. One such way he followed, until, when he reached the setting of the sun, he found it set in a spring of murky water. Near it, he found a people. So, follow this now. Alexander the Great traveled so far west, he found the place where the sun sets. Where does the sun set? The sun sets in a pool of murky water, and there are people who live there. Is this correct? No, you can travel west all you like. You'll never reach a place of the setting of the sun. You'll definitely never reach a pool of murky water where the sun sets, and you won't find any people living there because there is no such place. So think about any one of these passages should be enough to get rid of this argument that the Quran is a scientific masterpiece, who's so scientifically accurate we must submit to it as revelation from God.
Brother David, let me just interject. Perhaps you're familiar in that story in Surah 18. Not only did Dual-Qarnayn apparently go west,
Then
he went east, and guess what he found when he went far enough east?
Place where the sun comes up.
How did you figure that out?
I don't know.
I tell you, where is that place, by the way?
And interestingly, in the history of Al-Tabari, At-Tabari gives a story about Muhammad when Muhammad was discussing this issue of where the sun goes down. And if you'd like to know the full position, that's not in the Quran, there are actually 360 pools out there. There are 360 pools. Oh, no, 180 pools. 180 pools out there. And the Quran, and the sun goes down into a different one each day for a cycle of 180 days and then starts again. So very interesting position, very interesting theory. Of course, Muhammad's companions couldn't test it to see whether it's right. They believe he's a prophet, so they believe there must be 180 pools out there, and the sun sets in a different one each day. They must believe there's a giant fish down there. Muhammad says that's where earthquakes come from. They must believe there are 7 earths stacked up. They can't look under the earth to see what's under there. Problem is, eventually we can. Eventually we can investigate these things, and every time we can, Muhammad turns out to be completely wrong.
You know why you're wrong? I'll tell you. One time I was ministering to a very fundamentalist Egyptian Muslim down in North Carolina, and he was talking about Muhammad splitting the moon. You know, here's another natural thing that we can talk about. And I said, you know, it's interesting. There was all kind of people at that time that could have observed it, and nobody did. And he's like, oh, well, it happened. And I said, well, nobody's ever found evidence. Well, that doesn't mean that they won't one day find evidence. So the answer to your problem, David, is one day scientists will find those 180 pools into which the sun goes every other day. What do you think?
And actually, this is completely false. Yeah. We know historically where miracle reports from Muhammad came from. Muhammad went out. Muslims went out. They started preaching to Jews and Christians. They said, "Hey, believe in Muhammad." And the Jews and Christians say, "Well, what miracles did he perform?" And the Muslims said, "Well, he made a book. It's got some lovely calligraphy in it." And the Christians and Jews said, "What? We're used to Moses parting the Red Sea and Jesus raising the dead, and you're saying lovely calligraphy? What in the world are you talking about?" And all of a sudden, Muslims started coming back with these lovely stories about Muhammad. Yeah. Find me one that comes within a century of Muhammad's time. No, these stories come much later. And over time, you go from the Quran, where Muhammad didn't perform any miracles, to books like Ibn Ishaq, where he performed a couple, until you get to sources 300 years after the events, and all of a sudden Muhammad is performing thousands of miracles. There's a clear evolution there, but don't expect us to believe it. Your earliest source, the Quran, says over and over again that Muhammad could not perform miracles, and interestingly enough, the Quran itself refutes the claim that Muhammad split the moon. How does it do this? Well, the passages where the unbelievers challenge Muhammad to just perform one miracle, these passages were revealed after Muhammad supposedly split the moon in the sight of all the Meccans. So Muhammad supposedly splits the moon in the sight of all the Meccans, and then a couple years later, they're saying, how come you can't produce a miracle like the prophets of old did. And Muhammad doesn't say, what are you talking about? I split the moon. Not what he says at all. He says, I haven't been given miracles.
And that was one of their gods, so surely they would have seen it.
Oh,
people
would have seen it all over the place.
Yeah.
They kept very detailed records
absolutely.
of astronomical phenomena. They definitely would have kept tons of records of something like splitting the moon.
The Jews blocked it out. It's conspiracy.
The Jews. It was a Jewish conspiracy, my friends. You got to do something about those Jews.
The Zionists. Go ahead, David.
All right, let's keep going. We'll go through a couple more passages and we'll kind of wrap things up. The Quran, chapter 37, verses 6 through 7. We have indeed decked the lower heaven with beauty in the stars, for beauty and for guard against all obstinate, rebellious evil spirits. What are the stars for? What are the stars for, according to the Quran? They're for beauty. No problem there. I have no problem with God creating stars just for beauty. And for guard against all obstinate, rebellious, evil spirits. The stars protect heaven from evil spirits that try to sneak into heaven. So they should not strain their ears in the direction of the exalted assembly, but be cast away from every side, repulsed. For they are under a perpetual penalty, except such as snatch something away by stealth, and they are pursued by a flaming fire of piercing brightness. Let me read one more passage here along the same lines. There are actually 5 of these passages in the Quran. Surah 67:5 is one other. And we have from of old adorned the lowest heaven with lamps. And we have made such lamps as missiles to drive away the evil ones, and have prepared for them the penalty of blazing fire. What are stars? So Muhammad's telling us something about science. He's telling us what stars are. And what are stars? According to Muhammad, stars are missiles that God uses to shoot demons down when they try to sneak into heaven. And occasionally a demon does sneak into heaven. He hears something from God. He tries to run away, and God hurls a star at the demon, so the demon is pursued by a light of piercing brightness. We know from the Hadith, we know from Sahih Muslim, that Muhammad believed this was a shooting star. So think about this. Think of the tremendous errors in here. One, according to Muhammad, shooting stars are actually stars that have been hurled. No, they're not. Shooting stars are often little specks that hit the Earth's atmosphere, and they cause a bright light. Muhammad thought they were actual stars that had been hurled at demons. They're not. That's what the Quran says, and it's totally, totally wrong. Stars are not shooting stars. They're two completely different things. People during Muhammad's time thought they were the same thing, but people during Muhammad's time, like Muhammad, were wrong. So that's one error. The other is that these stars in the heavens are things that get hurled at demons, and that's what they do. Nonsense. Nonsense. What sense does it even make to say that God picks up a star and hurls it at a demon who's trying to sneak into heaven? Is this what you really believe in the universe? Where do we ever see this? Where do we ever see a star shooting across, shooting at someone, shooting at a demon or something like this? What sense does it make to say that a star, which is a physical object, hits an immaterial demon? What sense does any of this make? It makes absolutely none, and that's what we read in the Quran. So Muhammad, once again, is telling us about something about the structure of the universe, and eventually we can test it. Eventually we figure out what shooting stars are. Eventually we learn more about the structure and what stars are. And we find every single time that Muhammad's wrong about what he says. So we can certainly go into some of the commentaries. If you disagree with anything I've said, I have plenty of sources in the commentators and in the hadith to back up what I've said about Muhammad's view. Now, we could go on, but we saw earlier that Muhammad said there are 7 heavens. It's important to recognize what these heavens are, according to Muhammad. There are 7 domes, like the 7 flat earths, which go down. The 7 heavens are 7 domes that are stacked up one on top of the other. And if you want to doubt this, we can look at passages on this. But I want to try and get through the overall, try and get the big picture of Muhammad's view of the universe. What's important to note is that these 7 domes